Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line.
And today we've got a very special guest. I don't think it's safe to, I think it's safe to say one of the rising stars of comics, one of the rising stars of fantasy literature, and all embodied in the same man of Alexis Deacon. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm super happy to be here. I was just saying I've been watching a lot of Living the Line videos for over the last few days, and yeah, you put on a great show. I'm really looking forward to talking to you both.
Well, thanks,
Yeah.
appreciate it. And did you install the actual hot seat that we sent you?
Yeah, it's in. The vibrate function is on.
Excellent. And that's spring. I wouldn't
There's
worry
like
about
one of the smell generating nozzles is clogged, so I'm getting like these weird like umami notes. But
I think a lot of the people we just got back from San Diego Comic-Con, I think a lot of those people had smell generators as well. I don't know if it's the
yeah, God bless the comics community, but we do smell a bit ripe.
it's
Well, we
the
all
hotel life.
we all had to wear masks, so it was good. That was the first time I've been to Comic-Con where I was supposed to be wearing a mask, and I was like, God bless this. This is amazing.
How much of our audience can we alienate in the first 30 seconds of this
Oh
conversation?
man, I don't know about alienate. I'm with you. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
So
That's actually one of the things that I've loved about discovering the comics scene, because we might get on to talking about this, but most of my published career has been books for younger children. So I came to comics relatively late. I don't know if we can say that. But it's, that sensation of having found like your people who think like you, have the same concerns, the same obsessions. It's very strange to see your own personality mirrored in that way, but it's also, I think for a lot of comics artists, we've all been in that place where we were kind of the one of our type in any given community.
Yeah.
And so to find others is like, I don't know, like finding a raft in the ocean, you just kind of cling to it.
And sometimes you're like you're one of two, and you're forced to like deal with each other in a social situation. You're like, well, I don't really want to
Yeah.
talk about this right now. You're 14 years old. It's like, let's just wait a little bit, okay?
Yeah, the socializing can be a bit painful. That's why structure like this is so helpful. We have a structure, we can function.
Yeah.
Totally.
Great.
So I was going to ask you where in the world you came from.
Yeah, I was just saying to Carson.
Yeah.
So I was born in London. I grew up in London, lived there for most of my life, London in the UK. But I have since moved down to the coast of England to a small town called Hastings, whose one claim to fame is having been invaded by the Normans in 1066. Yeah, and you can still see William the Conqueror's castle actually out of my window.
Oh.
It's a nice slice of history right there. But it's great here, during the pandemic, it was absolutely perfect because I've been a big city boy my whole life. And like, what a time to choose to move out of our apartment in the city. When everything was kicking off, we had the sea, we had nature, we had less people. It was great.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as like the broader question of where you came from, or not broader, narrower question of where you came from, like specifically, I was like, this guy draws like an animal. He colors like an animal. Like I was shocked that I had not. Now, given I've got a hole in my comics experience that is about 2013 to 2019 or something, but I was shocked to see somebody whose abilities are fully formed, as you're hitting the page. So clearly, your work in and YA or what, not YA novels.
Yeah, really small little kids, like 3 to 7 year olds. Picture books for young children, and then a little bit of YA, like chapter book illustration. That kind of tradition. That's where I spent most of my time. That's where I kind of cut my teeth, if you like.
And you had education in that background as well.
Yeah. So I studied illustration, actually down the coast from here at Brighton University, also in the UK, and came straight out of college into picture books. So I zeroed in on that at quite a young age. I think, like many of us, you start drawing young, and it feels like a badge of identity and something that you can really lean on. So I've loved drawing since very small. And I also really enjoy, I know from listening to both of you as well that you really enjoy the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of the process. how to get better, what it is about what you like. And I think specifically then having to communicate it to other people through teaching has helped me a great deal. You know, when you're sat in front of another person and you're trying to explain why you think this is working or why you think this isn't working, it really sort of focuses your mind.
Well, and I've found we've all three taught. Sean taught high school. I'm still a professor. I find that I have to like tell them, you need to do this, you need to look at this, you need to pay attention to this thing. And then when I get home, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to pay attention to this. And so that constant like verbalizing it to someone else makes you yourself more accountable. And I think that more than anything has benefited me as an artist.
Yeah, because I think when you're looking at other people's work, you see the flaws in your own work, and you see the values that you aspire to as well. So I think as soon as you come to that awareness, it can be hugely helpful. And still, you know, some of the things that I tell my students every day, I still find incredibly difficult to actually put into practice myself.
Yeah.
But I understand that they're important. So
what's the one that haunts you the most?
Well, the main issue that I have is I love to like make things more complicated than they need to be in order to achieve the goal that I'm trying to achieve. So I end up spending a lot of time doing things that are not only not necessary, but actually maybe detrimental to my overall goal. I'm constantly telling my students, you know, that the principle is the important thing, and everything that you pile on top of the principle is often noise that gets in the way of the communication that you're trying to make. Yeah, I'll use the example of like, do you remember those in Ren and Stimpy when they did the kind of the painted still close-ups? It's like all about like texture of bogies, and there's like disgusting stuff in there. It's really rank, because for that moment of the story, like texture and surface are super important, or it's not funny. But for a lot of the time when you're telling a comic book story, like you're interested in the meaning behind a gesture or the meaning behind a look, and the texture and the surface of the thing can actually be quite obstructive to understanding the essence behind what you're trying to do. So yeah, trying to get all of that out of the way when I'm so fascinated by it and I love drawing it so much is problematic.
You are hitting on several of the things that I was immediately, you know, flagging. Like one of the things that I was going to say that immediately made me think animation is just your command of the figure, and how, you know, when you're using a figure that ends up being, you know, just a centimeter tall or whatever, it's still communicating just as well as when you're using a splash page or something like that. Like your figures always have that sort of animation, like exaggeration and the stretch and bend and everything. So is that something that is formally, you know, are you pulling from a tradition, or is this just a matter of going to the, you know, a play in the park performance and sketching every single person who's walking by on the stage? Or how did you get that particular, you know, thing?
I think probably a little bit of both of those things. I certainly, so to contextualize a little bit, and probably this will resonate with a lot of people who are artists themselves. Like you go on this journey, especially when you're a younger person, where you love drawing, and then you just improve automatically each year because your brain is growing and your intelligence and awareness are developing. And then there comes a point when you reach adult life where that sort of ceases, you know, or at least slows down. And so you have to engage with it, whether consciously or unconsciously, if you want to continue to progress. You can't just rely on it to happen organically. So one of the things that I was told to do at college, and had never really valued as a younger person, was to draw from observation. Because I always thought that, you know, I love drawing from my imagination, and all of the things that I really cared about were products of the imagination. But I'd never really seen how observation and imagination were connected. And then when I did what I was told and went out and started to draw the world and look at things, I realized that, you know, everything that I thought was imagination was just passive processing of stuff that had filled up my unconscious or filled up my waking brain. And so when you then went out and started to look at stuff, it was like filling up that tank with material. It was just loading like more stuff. And you started to be able to do things that you hadn't previously been able to do, because it's like you were looking at that thing, you were trying to understand what about it, you know, drew you to it in the first place. So there's been that sort of conscious process of looking at something, especially things that fascinate or motivate you or capture your attention. I'm trying to think, why have I fixed on that thing? What is it about it that I'm really drawn to, and how can I take that and then give it to somebody else? And then the other part of it is looking at other artists and just thinking for myself about, like, what is the functional element of what I'm doing? Like, what do I value in my own work, or what do I value in the work of others? And when I was growing up, I loved Hergé's Tintin. I loved Asterix. Those were the two like young person's comics that we had translated from the French here in the UK. And they were told predominantly through that kind of full figure view, even though there's like 12 panels a page or whatever. The story is predominantly told through the figure as a storytelling medium. And I absolutely love that kind of storytelling where the figure and the kind of like physical language of the figure is communicating the narrative. So I've really tried to make that a core part of my own work.
That's something I noticed, is that there's a lot of panels per page. You very rarely slow down for like the big shot, and when you do it, then it really matters. But then you're always like pulled back to full, well, not always, but quite often pulled back to full figures. But you don't have such a static camera as like Hergé would. So it's an interesting, like, kind of, I don't know, next step with that approach.
Yeah, I mean, as I think a lot of other comics artists, probably both of you as well, film has been a big influence, and the graphic language of film and the way that point of view changes to communicate a story. I've always really enjoyed that way of telling a story through your vantage point within a scene. So, that was a way that I arrived at for trying to bring a bit of dynamism back, because I'm not doing that kind of manga thing of slashing the panel shapes and bursting out of the borders. I wanted it to be a little bit more like a window that you look through, rather than a thing unto itself. Yeah, but so both of those things together, I don't know, they're it's all just pulling from things that you find that influences that I've adored.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting melange of techniques. I one of the reference points I was considering as I was looking at the first section of maybe 100 pages of the book. We should say the book that we're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Back up for a second here. So you had done a series that originally came out in 2015 and 2016. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
And is now being republished with the conclusion, 2-volume series called Curse of the Chosen. And it's coming out from a No Brow division called Flying Eye.
It's their imprint that they use for slightly younger readers.
Right, gotcha. And this is a very, very intense. You say slightly younger readers, but it's an extremely, let's say, like morally and spiritually intense. You put the grim back in the fairy tale, and as far as the actual like sort of visual approach to it, because of the animation aspect of it, and the sort of as you're saying, like the full figure communicative aspect, and also the fantasy setting, I had a little bit of shades of like Miyazaki's like Nausicaa, which, if you guys have never read that, is a Miyazaki's one of his only comic works that he did to completion. And Miyazaki, being an animation master, has some similar kinds of approaches in terms of his figurative use and stuff, and also just the unusual tool use, which obviously we'll come back to. But
just to pause on Miyazaki and Nausicaa for a moment, because when I saw that in my publisher's office, I was like, this is it. This is the gold standard. That's the line that I'm trying to cross. I absolutely adore. I mean, Miyazaki's work in animation, it's everyone knows it by now. Right. I don't know if Nausicaa the comic is quite as well known, but all of that visual awareness, that ability to tell stories, it's just there in buckets on every page. And I couldn't like that story more. And I there's some people you wish you could just keep them alive. It breaks my heart seeing him at 80 years old with his like masseur over his shoulder, massaging his shoulder muscles so he can keep drawing and just limp over the line for one more show. It's like, no, please give us another comic. Okay.
Yeah, and there's an aspect to it too where you can tell, it is of his hand in a way that obviously an animation is never going to be, because other than Winsor McKay, nobody's ever been as crazy enough to try to animate something by themselves.
I love Winsor McKay as well, another of my heroes. I just love that he hadn't thought to they didn't have the acetate film or whatever, so he has to draw the same like this. And most of the drawing is not even moving. I just love that. And he manages. There's like almost no what's it called, boil.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy was he was made of different stuff.
No, he certainly was, and it's a good thing that he had lamps, right? So he could keep on working at night.
yeah, for real.
Those kind of people make you feel guilty for sure.
Oh god, yeah.
Well, the aspect of Nausicaa the other aspect of Nausicaa that I wanted to tie back into your work is the sort of hand-hewn aspect to it. Like what are you doing for your line? Is this all dry brush? Is some of it pencil? Is some of it charcoal? What do you tell?
Well, it sort of changed as I went along, because it was my first attempt at doing a longer form comic, and I didn't know what I was doing. I knew what I liked, and I knew the processes that I'd used in my illustration work previously. So it's sort of different for the first part, the second part, and the third part. Three different processes, because I tried to kind of learn from each one and adapt and change the method slightly as I went on. So the first part, I mean, I thought this might come up, so I've got examples here. I know it's a little bit lame to hold it up to the camera.
No, that's fantastic.
They're here, so I'll grab them.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. We'll blow you up too, so they're bigger.
Yeah, blow me up.
Yeah, there we go.
That's what that hot seat's for.
That was the last anyone heard of him. So yeah, when I was starting out, I used to make a lot of mistakes. So I would just kind of draw one panel at a time, and it's ink dry brush for the majority of the line work. Right. The paper is a watercolor paper, so it has a little bit of a texture to it. So it just kind of it'll take the ink off the dry brush and make it look drier. The line breaks up quicker. And then like a watercolor wash on top for the grades. So there's let me see, I got a few examples here. So here as well, so the brush line, you can see that's the darker line. And then I would occasionally paint. I wonder if I have an example here. Yeah, here we go. So I would occasionally paint kind of, because it was quite robust watercolor paper, you could get it pretty soggy and it would hold its form. Right. So you could kind of paint like wet on wet as well as dry brush. So you kind of segue from the dry brush line into the wet on wet line. So you kind of got a little bit of a blurred edge to more distant things, especially in the first one.
Yeah, your use of that to give focus to different areas is quite extraordinary, and yeah, that's a very interesting. And then, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
That's specifically what I was wondering, is how you were subverting certain areas, like that scene where she's laid out like that. You have her in the full ink, and then you have everybody else rendered in wash, and so you've before you've even hit the color stage, you've already given focus to that.
Well, it was another thing that I was trying to do to, I guess, create engagement and dynamism within the limitations that I'd set for myself, because I wanted this strict grid format. I've never been a particularly good designer, so I wanted a format that stayed. I wanted that structure so that I could kind of be my usual like loose, scrappy self and just tie things down. So then being able to use layers of atmospheric perspective and create illusion of depth or pull focus to a specific point and say, this is literally where we're focusing because everything else is blurred. Those were very helpful tools. So yeah, this is the last example I pulled out of the shelf. So you can see there is kind of an interplay between the different tools that I'm using. I think there's also a little bit of white gouache spotting there to pick out some highlight areas. So I was really just using everything that I had on the desk. And then let me grab some ones from the second one.
I'm really surprised, honestly, that the color wasn't watercolor on the paper for the first volume. I thought the first volume was like hand watercolored.
Well, it kind of is. It's like here. It's like on a separate thing.
Okay.
Because I'd read about Hergé Studio doing this. I was like, I really want to try that. I can't remember the name of that wonderful colorist he had. I really should learn her name because I mention her a lot. Yeah, so I thought I want paint. I want the texture and limitation of physical paint. Right. So yeah, just go through and paint all the pages out in gouache and watercolor, and then pop them underneath.
Did you light box them? How did you?
No, it's a printout. So this is like printed at sort of 20% opacity, so you can't see the line work once the color goes on top.
Gotcha.
Because I found when I was using Lightbox, it distorts. You get that backlit thing, and it distorts. You kind of need to pre-plan the palettes. You couldn't just do it by eye.
Or turn it on and off, and you're constantly getting that glare.
Yeah, and I'm very vulnerable to that kind of like tension headache anyway. So I think that would have really destroyed me. In fact, Carson in his review picked up on the fact that the coloring process had changed and evolved, and noticed that it kind of like got a little bit better at using color. Yeah, I mean, you were interviewing Edo. His name is Edo, I think, who did Memories from Limon. He was talking about not being a confident colorist, and I definitely feel that I'm in the same category. So early on, I would try and use color in a narrative way. So like if there's a color choice, it has a narrative meaning or purpose, and that would kind of like help me to say, okay, so this is red means this, or green means this location, and try and give colors jobs to help break down the complexity of coloring, because it's so complex.
Right. Yeah. We talked about we did a little overview of Cam Kennedy's stuff, and that was one of the things Carson to me is so perplexing. How did you arrive at this choice? And Carson was like, he chooses a color scheme for each scene, and that's the only one he uses, and he's only using the reverse or whatever. And that's just like, right. You don't have to make the color of the teapot all the time. It doesn't always have to be local color. Comics has been addicted to local color for so long. It's I don't know. I was blown away by your color choices. It's very interesting to hear you say that you're that's, I mean, I guess if you're considering it, that's you're gonna make more informed choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you can definitely make a virtue of limitation. I'm certainly a big believer that the best art makes choices, and I feel like, right or wrong, it's always better to make a choice than be somewhere in the middle. do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think I don't understand as much about color and light as many of the colorists of contemporary superhero comics do. Like, they're wonderful realist artists, but I feel like they're not making choices a lot of the time. I feel like they use a lot of grades and fades, and I feel like they're very beholden to local color, just as you say, and that can be to the detriment of the narrative. Can be fine as well. And I know that a big part of a superhero is they are these colors. Spider-Man is not Spider-Man unless he's red and blue. So you can't really he can't do the teapot thing, or can he? I don't know.
He's got to sell underwear is the thing.
He's got to sell undies. Yeah, that's it.
So that everybody's got their Pantone guide out, making sure that he's towing.
Yeah, these are the Spidey. This is gonna chime with our product. Well, that's another topic that we could get onto.
Well,
anyway, I'll just quickly show the line work from the other two volumes, and then we can go back to
I want to see how the process evolved, because it was something I was tracking while I was reading.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. I think when you read a review by somebody who's very visually literate, it's a really nice thing to see how somebody who really understands the process is perceiving what you just put in front of them. Especially because you're absolutely right. Like, sometimes I don't know. I did get better though. So yeah, for the second one, I switched up to not using so many grays in the line work, because what happened when the color came behind was those grays were ending up washing out. I had to dial everything back so that the gray line work was still legible. You know, if you had vibrant color, the gray line work couldn't act as a bridge between color transitions. It just ended up making everything look like a soup. So all of those decisions that I'd made in the line work when it was just black and white, they didn't really make sense anymore when the color came in, or you were losing a lot of the original intention. So with the second one, I switched out to using pens and deeper, darker blacks as much as possible. So then hopefully when the color came underneath, you know, something like this, I tried to be more confident with areas of black where I knew that then you could have quite a saturated color underneath, or quite a dark tone. So that was all the line work for the second one.
And you're working on a full page now instead of
I'd got it.
piecemeal.
I'd got. It wasn't like I was working on a full page because I decided now I'm going to work on a full page. I just made less mistakes, because you both know when you make comics, like the amount of drawing that you're doing just makes you better by default. There's that kind of Golden Gate Bridge thing where by the time you got to the end, you wish you could go back to the beginning and start over again.
Yeah. Was there any compositional benefit to working full page that you found?
Yeah, I mean, not intentionally, but I'm sure intuitively you're making some decisions. But it's worth saying that my process was actually based off. I always had a pencil. The original story exists as an improvised pencil narrative. So the compositional questions were resolved at that stage. So even when I was doing the panels individually, they still related to the larger page structure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to be in a place where you'd made a load of weird tangents, or like one person's head becomes somebody else's butt, which was definitely the case when I was starting out, and I just couldn't do a whole page at one time. Then for the third one, I'll just finish off. Let me grab these. For the third one, I switched out the line work to working on this stuff called Polydraw, which is like a translucent drafting film. So that I could do the line art in pencil. Because what I was finding was I was losing a lot of fluency in the transition from pencils to inks, especially as it related to those things we were just talking about: characters, physicality, and expression. I mean, I just grabbed these at random. They're not particularly great examples, but just to give you a sense of what the physical object looks like. The wonderful thing about drawing in pencil and drafting film is the graphite goes very dark. So then when you're adjusting levels later, getting ready to color, you get a pencil line that's very close to true black. And that meant that when that volume ended up being colored, we could push the color quite a bit, as Carson picked up on, and properly use those line boundaries to make transitions, and do some things with like quite saturated color, quite dark color.
I did not pick up on a change from brush to pencil though. Like that. Yeah, that maintained. It looked like the same kind of brush work, the calligraphic, loose, dry brush work. To me, the thing I noticed was that, yeah, there were more saturated colors and more like warm and cool combinations, whereas the earlier volumes had been more like earth tones and stuff like that. And it looked like maybe there was some digital process involved in the third.
Yeah, it was entirely digital for the third one. Okay. I don't think we used. There's a few sequences that were preserved from my first attempts to color it, where they have some watercolor underpainting, same as the first two. But as you picked up on, there were two colorists who helped me to turn that over quick enough, because I don't have any background in digital art. So whilst I use Photoshop as an image compiling tool, I'd never used it to make publishing standard artwork before. So Finn Fitzgerald and Holly Dyer, who were the two colorists I work with, were really helpful in explaining to me how to use digital color in a way that didn't have those very awkward edges, I guess, and that kind of suffer a little bit from being too slick. And we learned a lot just trying to teach each other. They were trying to teach me how to use digital coloring media. I was trying to teach them the kind of things that I valued in color work. And I think between the three of us, we came up with a process that I ended up really, really enjoying. And I sort of started to teach myself like new stuff about color. And particularly, as Carson said, it's, actually making those boundaries meaningful, making a choice. So you're either going from a step where your color is close or your color is distant. So I tried to do much more work with contrast, whether you're taking a jump from warm to cool, or you're taking a jump from light to dark, or from bright to dull, so that when there's a color transition that has meaning, it's a big jump and not like a halfway house. And that's definitely something that I'll continue to do in future work.
I kind of tooled through the book a little bit, looking at, I've been working from a PDF, so I can look at, every page as a little postage stamp. And it was quite interesting to see the sort of narrative as color that you employ in terms of scene by scene breakdowns. And it seems like there's a rhythm to your usage, and it could be that it's just the rhythm to your storytelling, because it's reflective narratively too. The story, involves these 50 characters who are all, have the possibility of being the heirs to this kingdom and are instead ensconced in this insane, scheme. And because you have so many different characters, you sometimes, use chunks of narration for tension. So we'll follow one of them for 2 or 3 pages, and then we'll hit another one. Well, it seems like you reinforce those chunks with that color usage. We'll follow somebody and it's all orange for that whole scene, and then it's all green, and then it's all brown. And these two little sort of versions of seeing the same thing are running together in a very satisfying way. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to know that not only you picked up on that, but that you found that was helpful, because especially with the first one, where I was just starting out as a comics artist, and there's so much to learn. I knew from early readings that there's a lot of jumping around and a lot of characters to keep track of, and that can really pull you out of the narrative because it can feel very discombobulating. So having like a color where you can see, we changed from the green place to the yellow place, that felt like a way of just saying it's this kind of groups all this complex stuff together into something that you can actually track. It's like, we're back in the green place. Okay, I can this is something I can work with. So yeah, absolutely. And that helped me as well, because just like Ada was saying, I needed to limit the number of choices that I was facing. Otherwise, it just dropped like too many balls in the air. They just all landed up on the floor, and it was a big mess. But I didn't want the whole book to just be like 3 colors or whatever. I wanted to feel like a richly colored, a world where anything is possible. So one of the answers to that was to say, okay, let's organize scenes by color. Let's organize emotions by color. Let's organize motifs by color as well, so that you're kind of a little bit like if you're composing a score for a movie, and you hear those 3 notes, and you're like, yeah, that means this in this world. That's something that I very much enjoy in other people's work, so I tried to implement it in my own.
Your book, this book really is a juggling act, I imagine, as the creator, and that's one of the things that I found. The further I read it, the more involved I became, because of how successful you were juggling. Because the assumption is kind of that there's 2 main characters, right? But then you successfully juggle all of these like tertiary characters in around them, in ways that the further you go, you see the setups earlier on, like how the whole crew comes together eventually. And
Right.
I was impressed by that. So was that natural for you? Was there like some kind of board you had that helped you keep all this?
Not a board as such. I mean, it's definitely something that I was aspiring to do because of, again, like I guess you've had on in the past, like who have been narrative geeks, which I very much think of myself as well, like that kind of armchair pilot in the when you're reading or when you're watching something and you're like, yeah, like Game of Thrones season 8. It's like, oh my God, you had me in the palm of your hand and then boom, you just
Botched it.
Disaster.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't want that to happen.
Yeah, no,
So yeah, I mean, but behind me is one of my absolute favorite comic series, Isaac the Pirate by Christophe Blain. Mm-hmm. And you get the sense that it's improvised. And as it goes on, it just kind of fizzles out. The characters are still great. The artwork is amazing, but it didn't know where it was going. So I'd set myself the challenge, like, I want to write a comic that feels improvised, but that knows where it's going. So I use that, Curb Your Enthusiasm, that kind of structure where it's like beats that are steps on the road, and then you just improvise your way to the steps on the road. So I knew from the moment where I improvised the scene where Io and Nemus come back, and they're the first ones that come back, and they take two different roads, I was like, oh, I know what's going to happen with this story. Because it's kind of like one of these stories where it's been written like thousands of times before, because it's one of the stories. Like, okay, so this is that type of story. So then it was a question of like, okay, how does it work for everybody else? And one of the rules that I set myself was freedom in the beginning, but at the end of the story, you can only use, it's a little bit like with the color, you can only use the palette that you chose. Like, you can pick any color in the world. You pick these 5 colors. Okay, those are our 5 colors. Now those are the colors that we're going to recall when we come to the end. So things like Nemus with the dragon in the third part, where when you very first see him, he's got dinosaurs, and there's like, he jumps on this like little ostrich dinosaur, and it's like the same. It's the same thing. Io, when she's like drowning, and she just dumped in the water in the first part, and she's like, it's like, then you see it again when she's, well, that would be a spoiler. Yeah. But you know what I mean? So it's like those are the notes you can play. Now, how are you going to hit them again? So I think it's sort of like, it's not a question of contriving or curating from the beginning, but rather like making something and then seeing what you have once it exists, and then say, okay, that's what I got to play with. So for example, some of the characters who we stay with for longer than others, like Arthur and Eloise, or Malmo and the Judge, like, if you think about it, they're also pairs of opposites, like it's cat and mouse, or it's kind of like the pious, like the one who's faithful to the law, and the one who kind of corrupts the law, and they're all boy girl pairs as well. So it's sort of like, but that wasn't designed at the beginning. It's just like, oh, that's something that I've got, so let's use it.
Right. And similar to, if you do like a jazz improvisation or something, you're a saxophone player or something, and you play a certain kind of lick and it's got a sour note in it. The old joke is that, you play it once and it's a mistake. You play it 4 times and it's a choice,
Exactly.
You hit that beat that first time, and you're like, oh, right, that right there. So that's what's coming back to it. And it's very interesting when you say that you improvise the whole thing as a pencil. Do you actually have any of that handy right now so we could see what
I do? Like? It's going to involve me getting up and opening a drawer, so that'll be a little bit of action. Talking about ourselves. It's in here somewhere.
because that basically, when you said that, I felt like that explained a ton of my questions for you right there off the top of the bat, because you are engaging in that separation process where your pre-visualization and writing brains were wholly engaged with making that, and then your drawing and completion brain could be a separate segment, right? You're not even.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, I mean, like, I didn't know what my process was before starting out on this, but I think that that kind of defines what my process became. It was like complete investment in the part that you're currently doing. So writing and structuring, that's all you're thinking about, is structuring. And then you just let it go, kind of. And it's like, okay, now it's line work and human action and characterization and like realizing all of this. And then it's like, okay, now the color work. So yeah, and each step of it, you're like, that's all you're thinking about. So yeah, the pencil roughs, they look something like this. So I mean, actually, what I might do is grab the book here so I can show you a sort of comparison. So they're extremely rough, but they're compositionally consistent with what appears in the book. So let me just see if I can pull out that page. It's somewhere near the beginning. Is that the one? Yeah. So this is that's the page as it appears in the published book. And whoops, this is the rough. It has something behind it. So, but everybody's in the exact same place as they appear in the published artwork. But of course, there's a lot more information there. Let's see if we can find some others. Yeah, excuse me for the thing on the back of this showing through, but
Oh, it's okay. And so when you say that, like, that's all you're doing, you're talking about for the whole book, like you laid out the whole book before you went.
And not just the whole book, but the whole series. I mean, when part one was made, parts 1 and 2 were written and part 3 was conceived. When part 2 was being made, part 3 had already been written. So in that sense, you know, I was able to do some of those things that you were both referring to, where it sort of feels like things relate to one another, because when part 2 was being executed, I knew everything that was going to happen in part 3. So you could kind of play that game a little bit. And that's where Isaac the Pirate comes back in, because I just wish that kind of aptitude for moment to moment storytelling had been applied to something that had a payoff, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And it really does. Cause like when you first start reading it, it is like, oh, fantasy, I'm familiar. Like you said, I know what type of story this is now. You knew that as a writer. And so, okay, I know what I'm reading. It's fun. But then as you keep going and you see the planning and the payoff, and in the review I did,
it pile on.
Yeah, it was
detail.
The court scene that I just liked it as a moment, but I didn't think it was going anywhere. And then reading volume 3 to see how essential that was, then like this kind of faceted jewel work of the story kind of becomes clear. And that's where I go, oh, I really, really like this. Not just like it's fun. So you set it apart, I think, somehow by doing that.
Thank you so much. And it was wonderful that you mentioned that court scene, because like it is a bit of an indulgence, because I love that kind of thing. I love court scenes in comics. They're just such a wonderful metaphor for so many things. And, you know, you got all these wonderful costumes and everything. But I was like I had to search, like I wanted a legal paradox, because I knew this is what the whole thing is about, right? It's actually all about that court scene. So it's kind of an allowable indulgence, I guess. But the legal paradox that's in there is I think it's from ancient Greece. It is a very early example of a legal paradox. I forget.
Okay, I was wondering if that was a standard one, or if you're just like that supremely clever.
No.
I wanted to let you be that supremely clever.
No, sorry, I ruined that.
No, it's okay. I would have done the same thing. Legal paradox. Google.
That was a scene that I often think to myself that editorial standards being kind of there was a period in which things were very tight editorially in the fiction world, and I think that was sometimes to the detriment of the fiction. And that was one of those scenes where I was like, this is a thing that somebody at some point has said, get that out of here. And if somebody hit, and they would have been wrong, right? I don't know if you've ever read the great Gene Wolfe, his series, The Book of the New Sun. Like your series, he kept one ahead of each draft. So he was on draft 4 of the first one by the time he was on draft 3 of the second one, and draft 2 of the third one. So he was able to write them all in sequence. And right in the middle of all 4 of these books is a play that the characters enact, and because he had the trust of somebody who was like, I'm not going to touch this guy's stuff, they left this in here, and it's critical to the understanding of the whole thing. But there's some certain percentage of the people who read the book are just like, what is happening? Why is this here? And you have to get to the end to come back to it, which is all to say, that did you have kind of editorial pushback, or was this something where you were developing it enough on your own that you didn't get
I mean, so that was very much to Grubaugh's credit. I felt like the editorial support that I got from them was really first class. I'd done a little bit of that work myself by showing it to friends, other comics makers, like people whose opinion that I trusted. And there are big swathes that did get cut because people said, like, why is this in here? And I had no good answer to it. It just seemed like a good idea at the time, and then it kind of sits with you for a few days and you're like, actually that does not need to be in there, and it doesn't make any sense. So by the time it had come to Grubaughh, it had already sort of gone through like 5 or 6 different individuals, so been a little bit battle tested, but they were always excellent in giving me just enough so that it's like they would pick up on flaws that were proper, like substantial structural problems with the story, and they would just leave. They would trust me to do everything else, and that was really satisfying. So they never even mentioned the courtroom scene, even though they hadn't read the third part at that stage. Now there's a flip side to that argument where, it's not like the editor who would have picked up that scene would necessarily have been wrong. Like, I think there is a portion of readership that would find a scene like that to be alienating. And I think that there's certainly, like, the books, they don't sell very well. And I think part of that is like I've always, like, as a matter of principle, like, no prisoners, no hand holding. The audience is king. You can do this, audience. You can, like, I trust you. I trust you to bring this to life with your own imagination and understanding. But I think for some readers, there's too much goofy stuff in there and too much idiosyncratic stuff. And it's like, what is this? They just, I mean, it is valid, but I do think, like, comics are so much hard work to make, and so much blood, sweat, and tears goes into it. You better tell the story you wanted to tell, and just, let the world make it what it will of it. And if it does well, great. If it doesn't, you gave your best shot. It's all good.
Do you get a sense that this new format is making it, because that was kind of what was going on? I assume the other reason behind the new format is that the volumes get significantly longer each one. Is that helping with people, like,
based on
internet
engagement? I would say no, but I think these things can be a relatively slow burn. I think the few reviews that I've read, and I'm not so much including your own, but from people who don't make comics but who just read comics, that's really the audience that I've always struggled to reach, because I always feel like I've communicated well to my peers, to other people in the same profession, with, just like we were saying at the start, with the same concerns, the same motivations, and the same interests. But reaching out to an audience beyond that has always been a little bit problematic. And the few reviews that I've read from that kind of audience have been very encouraging, but it is a small number for sure. So yeah, I mean, it's out there now, and the format does make it more accessible. The original title was Geis, which is a Gaelic word, Geis. So it's difficult to pronounce. It does that thing, right? It's like that. It's like having that court scene on your cover. It's like, screw you, audience.
Yeah.
Here's this thing that even I don't understand properly, and I've put it on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of people who, I mean, those early editions they're much more beautiful productions. They have like a hardcover cloth spine, paper stock's a bit better, you know, so the comics crowd, I think, prefers those. These are designed to appeal more to younger readers who are used to manga, something a little bit more ephemeral. And of course, as you're saying, like, the third volume is the same length as the first two put together, so it kind of makes shelf sense. But we will see.
Well, and I think some of that, like talking to your peersness that you're talking about, is those original volumes kind of present it that way. Like Nobrow has these, I mean, just absolutely top flight productions, but then you're pretty much speaking to connoisseurs with that. Like me, I'm like looking at the paper and I'm telling Sean, look at this paper. We got to figure out where they get this paper. Look at the fiber. And, you know, I mean, that's what you're engaging with that format. So
oh God, I was
the format change made sense.
Yeah, I remember going, like, I think Ado told a similar story, like just go into Nobrow store or any store that's stocking their products, and you just want to be part of that team. You want to be like, dude, make something this beautiful with the work that I made, please.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but you're right, it's got a limited reach, I guess.
Well, what do you have on your drawing board right now? What's next?
Well, I'm going to be taking a little break from comics. I've been working on a cartoon for the last couple of years in the concept art department, just doing background design. And that is coming out on Cartoon Network this winter. It's called The Valiant Quest of Prince Ivander, who I think has a very long title, but Prince Ivander in big, lots of little writing in small. And I have a picture book out, new picture book called Ergo, which is somewhere illustrated by a friend of mine, and I'm just currently working on a new story for younger readers. I really need Curse of the Chosen to do well so that I can afford to do a new comic, because I have the idea all ready to go. Yeah. I feel like I've learned some lessons. The main lesson I've learned is don't take so long.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where the financial burden starts to kick in, right? It's like, man, I need time for this.
Hard thing. I mean, you're talking about, what is it, 500 pages total? I mean, how do you know, yeah, it's tremendous, right? The industry is in a weird place where, you know, somebody of your skill level and caliber can't, it's hard to reach people. But I think it's got a huge potential reach. I mean, it's a fantastic
I'm really happy that you two liked it as much as you did, rather.
No, I think it's a fantastic book, and I'm hoping that everybody who's watching this interview and will pick it up immediately and make the next one possible. So,
yeah, I even know the title of the next one is called The Red Mask. I've been planning it for like, years now. So I'm super excited to get going on that.
The Red Mask. Are you sure you don't want to say mask in a different language? Maybe we can find like.
Oh, by the time it's printed, it's going to be in Latin for sure, or ancient Aramaic. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a thing in the end of the second part where there's like a Rosetta Stone thing where you can kind of decode the script, and there's like the spell there, and if you have the time, you can. Like, even I don't remember how to do that damn thing. Someone messaged me on Instagram to say, "Oh, I just wanted a bit of help with the code from the end of book 2." I'm like, I have no idea. It's that thing you were talking about where it's like complete focus for the time that you're there, and then it's gone.
Yeah. I did spend some time looking at your page of ancient language and picking out at least 2 English words. I won't spoil it for anybody who wants to do the same, but I kind of just glaze my eyes over and let the words.
Well, I guess that's another example of something that seems like an indulgence, but is kind of integral. So I should show that the part that I mean. There's this thing at the end of the second book, and it has, you know, kind of like the Rosetta Stone, the same thing in 4 languages. So if you track through, you can. There's a lot of one of the wizards in the story, the sorceress. She speaks her spells in one of these languages. So if you can be bothered, you can decode her spells. But then there's this sort of worm-eaten thing, which is a page that's pulled out of a book that the main character finds early on in the story. And this page becomes important because the sorceress finds it, and there's like a spell on there which is important for her. So this is that spell, but because there are missing bits, she mistranslates it, and yeah,
it's fantastic.
Problems. Anyway, so yeah, that's definitely an indulgence, but
well, so I'm gonna break the conversation just for a second here. So should we wrap, Carson, or should I say goodbye and let you guys continue? What would you like?
I could chat for some more if Alexis is willing to go. Okay. I know Sean's got to run. Yeah, so that piece that you just showed was something, and it's funny to me that you're saying I don't even know how to translate the damn thing anymore, because my reaction to that was like, I've made puzzles before too, but I'm not the guy that's going to solve them, and it sounds like you're kind of the same way.
Yeah, I mean things stick in my head in a very sort of like all-consuming way for a certain amount of time, and then they just leave. And yeah, that was one of them. I mean, I think I could probably figure it out now if I put my mind to it, but yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of
information, like we were talking about the coloring and the structure and everything. Like you have to be very present with it in the moment, but if you carry it with you all the time, it's going to be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah. Are you prone to doing other people's puzzles? Like, do you like solving puzzles, or was it more satisfying, like from the mechanics? Because you seem like kind of everything, even though it's improvisational, has like a kind of mechanical rules and stuff behind it.
Yeah, I have the kind of brain that really enjoys deconstructing in order to find rules of structure. So yeah, I enjoy. I mean, I love making my own board games and like playing board games like that kind of puzzle solving. I do enjoy it, but yeah, I guess I don't spend too much of my time doing that. I mean, because I think, I don't know if you can relate to this, but you know, when you are a comics artist, so much of your life is spent in close proximity to screen or desk or page.
Yeah.
When you do have free time, you better get outside, or you better do something else.
Yeah, a hike is really satisfying. Yeah, that's very difficult. I haven't gone hiking in a long time, and you go a little bit nuts after all.
Yeah, I mean, I have this kind of joint condition, which means that if I don't take that side of things seriously, I get really badly like messed up. I had to stop work for a few years. I didn't know what was going on, but yeah, I couldn't draw for a while. And so these days I have to make the effort to get myself away from the desk.
Are there like exercises that you do and stuff like that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like a known thing. Like it's not particularly serious, but it's a pain in the ass. It's a form of hypermobility syndrome. So I've got all my joints are a little bit too elastic. So it tends to manifest in me as just like a lot of muscular tension. Okay. Yeah, unless I take the time to maintain myself, I go into a downward spiral pretty quickly. That's part of the reason why I'm also a bit slow.
Does that help you with the like loosening up on the artwork too? Because you have
to like... yeah, it's there's just no way that I could function as exerting more control. Like the more I try and control that line, the more tension comes back into my system. So I guess I've got to really value the quality of being gestural in drawing as much as possible, and trying also to make space within a drawing where it's kind of like, okay, this is less pivotal than this other moment, so I can invest my attention and my detail and my constraint here in this moment, and then just let go a bit and be a little bit more free for the rest of the surface.
Yeah, I'm still I'm still someone who's like up in every line, and I'm trying to have to learn to sit back and let loose, because like just age will come in too, you know, like, oh man, like I've
yeah,
destroyed my
exactly. The
wrist.
same train's coming for all of us. It's just
Yeah,
some of us
you
get to
gotta
the station earlier.
learn how to write it.
But that's another of those examples where, you know, something that's kind of forced upon you, like the color stuff, you have to make it a virtue. Like that's the hand that you got dealt, so you decide how you're going to play it. I think that comes back into what we were talking about with structuring the story, where you're looking at what ingredients you actually have left over from part one, and then how can you use those elements. So, you know, on my bad days, I'm sort of railing against my fate and wishing things could be otherwise. But on my good days, I think, you know, this has probably made me the person that I am, and it's led me to value some things that maybe if I could do what I truly wanted to do, you know, maybe I would be a worse storyteller for it.
Yeah,
I think there's
and
a lot to
that's
be said for constraint and limitation.
well, and I think that's what you were talking about with like these colorists too. They just have no constraint. It's not even that they're just not making choices, it's that their choices are removing, they're not giving themselves any restraint to work with, right? Yeah, it's like the whole toolbox is available to us.
Yeah, it becomes quite problematic, I think. You know, I love early golden age superheroes, silver age superhero comics also. I mean, I've always been a little bit sort of backward looking in my aesthetics, my influences anyway. But I do find that we forget that, you know, just because the tool shed grew, that doesn't mean we have to use all of them at once.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a common song to sing, isn't it? And I know that other people that you've spoken to have mentioned the same sort of stuff. But the fact of the empowering, the freedom that the computer gives you is it can be a bit of an issue artistically.
Yeah, and like you can like noodle infinitely and just like never come to make a decision on a piece, and yeah, that's a huge danger. Talking about going backwards, I kind of wanted to go backwards. You're talking about like just valuing these older things. There were some questions that I wanted to ask that we hadn't got to yet. One of them being like with the fantasy genre in general, is that where your major investment is, or is this a one-off?
When I think of narratives, they tend to, when longer form narratives, not their stuff for younger children, it tends to be within the fantasy genre. I think it's because, you know, my main motivating passion is the kind of landscape of the human psyche, like the mythic landscape, the archetypal landscape. That's always been the kinds of stories that I've been drawn to the most, and those are the stories that I most want to tell. I think it comes back to that thing that we were talking about stripping away surface to try and find the substance within. And to me, in story terms, that means myth. Like, you know, I love reading nonfiction. I love reading fiction where the illusion of reality is an important component of the fiction, but that's not the kind of fiction that I want to create. I'm much more interested in the kind of mythic landscape of fantasy. So yeah, it's certainly for as long as I can see into the future, that will be the genre that I work within.
And the reason I asked that is because it struck me almost as kind of brave these days. I feel like, I mean, there's plenty of fantasy success like Game of Thrones and stuff, but there does seem to be a general cultural pushback against that archetypal thinking, or the kind of polar binaries and stuff that you were talking about. This character's like they're kind of these binary opposites and stuff like that. So it felt brave to me in a sense to go back to this almost archetypal story. Are you aware of that at all, or you're just doing what you like and who cares?
I mean, I'm aware of trends within within comics publishing and within sort of mass culture in general, but I try not to be too influenced by them, because I've never been good at following, or I've never been somebody who can imitate something stylistic or capture something that's in the zeitgeist particularly, I'm always just missing the point, even when I try to align with it. And in fact, the more I try to align with it, I feel like the more I miss the mark. So I think that like my own work, it just has to be what it is. And if it happens to not be fashionable right now, or not be how people are thinking about narrative right now, then so be it. You know, it's all I got. But also, you know, on a more serious level, I truly believe in the value of those types of stories and the necessity of them for a human being to be able to process the experience of being alive. Like, you know, I think being in the world can be a very confusing, disorienting experience. But there are certain absolutes and truths that anchor us and let us know that we're part of something big, you know, and that big thing has a truth. And to me, the way that we access that truth is through story. You know, it's almost like a kind of a religious relationship with story. That's the way that I feel about it. It's like I care about stories that much that, you know, without them, I don't really feel like life is worth living. Like the stories are the flavor of life for me. And more than that, like they're kind of like, they strip away all this kind of noise and clutter and take me down to what's actually really going on.
Yeah, and I think that's why it works so well. Like, it's still speaking like a language that children speak. Like, as you get to be an adult, you can sit there and you can have an honest conversation about like some psychological thing that's going on with you. You can say, yeah, well, this is because this happened and this happened, or like, this is what's being in a relationship is about, like in a very literal way. But that metaphor is almost like parables or something that communicates well to children and still adults as well. But it felt, something about that felt brave and different for, right, not new, but like something I haven't seen in a while. It reminded me of the stuff I, you know, it was like stuff in the 80s when I was a kid. There's some kind of sense of that.
Ah, that's great to hear. I mean, that's definitely what I was chasing after, because I feel like those stories that I sort of partook in when I was small, like I just loved them so much. Like they meant everything to me. And especially, you know, it was interesting hearing Sean say that, you know, for kids, like it's a little bit like it's quite intense for kids. But I sort of feel like, yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing. The stories that I loved the most were the intense ones, because I sort of feel like, yeah, this is the real stuff. This is this like you know, that old animated Watership Down that, have you seen that one? The one that's kind of got all the blood and guts. And
which one is it? What's it called?
What Douglas Adams, is his name? No, I'm said the wrong thing. Richard Adams, I think. I forget his name. Anyway, Watership Down, the novel about the rabbits.
No, I don't
and then
know
there's
if
an
I've seen
adapted
that.
adaptation, and
I don't
it's
know that
just
I've
very
seen that.
brutal.
The one that I was going to was this the Secrets of Nim.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. Secrets of Nim, I would love to have made Secrets of Nim. I think that's fantastic. It's exactly the kind of thing that I'm chasing after. That's the kind of fantasy that really appeals to me, and that's sort of the place that I want to occupy for as long as I'm able to write.
And it's that same type of like I went back and watched that as an adult, and I was like, how did this not scare the hell out of me as a kid? But I love that thing. Or
probably did at first.
I like the Never Ending Story. Like that's a terrifying film, but like I just love that as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole thing for me, that like we should not be afraid. Sorry, we should not be afraid to be scared, especially by the big things, like by the real things. I feel like it's sort of cheating children out of something essential about growing up. You know, if they don't hear about it in a story, then they're sure as heck going to find out about it the other way. You know, when something terrible happens to them in real life, as it surely will, maybe not as a child, but perhaps, if you live long enough, you're gonna lose people that you care about. Things are going to happen to you.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. And not having faced those kinds of fears in a safe context, I feel like is a big loss. Those things are important. They're kind of like armor for us. Like with the stories like Secrets of Nim, for example, I might have been quite scared by it on first watching, but I would just keep going back to it again and again and again. Yeah, it's something that you almost can't put into words, that feeling that you get from a certain type of story. It's more of a sensation, I guess, or yeah, like something transporting. Anyway, that's definitely what I'm chasing after. If a child comes up to me, like if I live long enough to hear it 20 years in the future and says, "Oh, I had your book when I was a kid, it scared the bejesus out of me, but I loved it," like mission complete.
I think you'll get there, because it has that. The other thing it has, and it's embedded in the new title, The Curse of the Chosen. It's something that I've noticed in the difference between fantasy when we were kids. I'm 40. I don't know how old you are, but talking about stuff in the 80s. And then movies now, I've noticed at some point, like I think it's the Harry Potter thing. Harry Potter is the chosen. And so someone shows up and says, "Hey kid, you're chosen." And he's kind of like, not really. Whereas the kid stuff that I was watching, it's always the kid who makes the first step, like goes into the store and steals the book, or goes into the store and buys the mogwai, or gets on their bike and goes and searches for the treasure. And it seems a bit dangerous to me to just, all the kids are now, "Well, you're the chosen one, come here." They don't have to go earn it. And so you even have that embedded in your title almost, that there's a curse that, I mean, I know it's meant in a different way. It's a group of chosen that are cursed, but it reminded me that. And then the characters really, even though they do have this quest set upon them, there's a lot of agency on their part in the way that I don't feel that there is in a lot of kids' fantasy today.
That's really interesting to hear you say. That's not consciously done, but it's definitely something that I will tell to my students who are making books for younger children. The character needs to be an agent in the story, or the story will often function better if they are. Like, don't let things land on their lap. Let there be some action that they've taken that set the wheels in motion. Let this be part of their agency within the world of the story. And to be honest, I'd never thought about that aspect of Harry Potter before. I mean, I really like Harry Potter, but it sort of wears the coat of one of these fantasy stories. But to me, that's not what makes Harry Potter satisfying. I don't think it's a particularly good, like the kind of Voldemort Harry thing that never really worked for me. That the thing that I love about Harry Potter is the coziness, is Hogwarts, is that idea that you got plucked out of meaninglessness and obscurity and placed within a world of where you're special and celebrated. And maybe that's something that resonates with children today. Maybe that's something in the world around us. I mean, that story is a little bit old now. But yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? That should be something that happens to you because it's kind of like your birthright that it happens to you. And it's interesting thinking about what that means in terms of our larger sense of self.
Yeah, it's the pluckedness, like you've been plucked because you've got this thing on your head, and then you kind of deal with it, rather than like you just went out and you were a kid on your bike because you could do that, and you went and got into some shit and then had to deal with it. Or like the kids in It, these are just kids roaming around on their bike and they take it upon themselves to beat this thing. That seems different than the plucked thing you're talking about.
That's always been like that was one of the central pillars of Geshe, of Curse of the Chosen. Like, characters get what they ask for. Like, if you actually look at what each character actually wants, that is what they get at the end of the story, with maybe a couple of exceptions. But I've been very interested for a long time in this sense that we really sometimes things are taken out of our control. Sometimes we're thrust into things that we have no responsibility for. But to a very large extent, we are, through our choices and actions, responsible for the lives that we make and the world that we shape around us. And I feel like that's kind of important that exists in a story context. So yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted characters who sort of had their own interior autonomy, like who got to want things other than like winning the contest, who like characters who just wanted to go to bed and stuff like this.
I'm done with this awful contest. Just
Yeah,
sleep.
I mean, I really kicked that guy in the ass for it, but that's because that's a decision that I made at one point. Like I sort of gave up on things and just went to bed, like retreated from the world. And so that character who makes that choice in that story, I'm like, you made the wrong choice, fucker. I'm gonna kick you in the ass for it. A little bit of self abuse there.
But that's good, because a lot of people don't see that. Like they'll be like, I have bad luck, you know, and then if you really break it down, it's like, okay, yeah, but like you also did this, and this, and you know, like I'm always trying to be aware of that myself. Like if something goes wrong, I'm also trying to look at how maybe I led to that with maybe a decision I made like 10 years ago or something. And sometimes it's just, you know, you ran over a nail.
Yeah, there's definitely, freak luck is definitely a thing. You know, I feel like, so a story like Lord of the Rings, for example, this has a few of these kind of elements within it, doesn't it? Like, and this kind of brings us to that difference in kinds of fantasy. So, for example, like Boromir, you know, he makes a wrong decision. He crosses a line, and then he pays a price. And to a contemporary palate, that's too neat. You know, that is not how life actually works. You know, that you don't like make a bad deed and then get punished for it. You could be an absolutely awful human being and you know, have a wonderful life, be completely happy with it. And so there's definitely a sort of challenge to that in narrative now, where you're like, we need more shades of gray, we need more ambiguity, we need more texture, more reality. But I'd kind of dispute that and say that Boromir's action and the consequences that he pays for it, it does have a truth to it. It has a kind of a human truth to it, certainly a psychological human truth to it. And that's kind of like why it feels right. Like that's something that I love about stories and storytelling. It's sort of, yeah, you can teach them, but fundamentally, like anybody can go and have a story told to them and they will know whether it felt right or it felt wrong. Yeah. And sometimes even at a specific moment, like if we come back to Game of Thrones again and look at season 8, not everybody could tell you how and why that house of cards came crashing down, but they all felt it. You know, the story at the end did not feel right. It was an unpleasant sensation watching that story die on the screen.
Yeah.
So I think when you understand that story has this kind of instinctual element to it, that's where things like what happens to Boromir become important, because it feels right. Like, you know, anyway, we could have a longer conversation about this, but, and you definitely, like, I do think that both sides of that argument are valid. But in terms of the kinds of stories that I like to tell, they tend to be more of that type where I'm looking for the sorts of stories that you feel out rather than think out, at least at the beginning.
Is that fascination with story, almost like to a nerdy level about narrative and how narrative works? Is that what drove you to move from just like illustration to full on narrative comics?
Yeah, I mean, I was writing my own stories for younger children. But they were very short. You know, it would be like an alien who crashes to Earth and she can't find her mum, and then she finds her mum, and that's the end, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think it was more to do with having a love for comics. Like I've always, when I buy things, when I buy books, I buy comics. Tends to be. But it was more to do with how my relationship with the publishing culture in the UK that I was working with, because they did not want me to cross certain lines.
Okay.
And I just hated that process, like having ideas rejected on the basis of them having content which was difficult, related to everything that we've just talked about. Like I thought it was valid because it had the difficult content, and taking that out was a very soul destroying process. So I wanted to be able to work for an age range where you could be a little bit more free in what you put on the page. And yes, something that allowed you to have subplots and, was a bit more of a challenge structurally with all the balancing. So I'm hoping to, I don't want to try and be more ambitious with the second one, but I'm hoping to implement some of the book that I was just talking about, The Red Mask.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that I can implement some of these things that I've learned and go around again and do it even better, but we'll see.
Oh yeah, I certainly hope so, because the progress, I mean, it's a great book from the beginning, but the progress and growth is very clear throughout the book too, but also in a way that maintains consistency. Like you're going through and showing us all these wildly different processes you use, but you flip through the book and you're never like, oh, he switched processes. It's just like, oh, like he made some kind of improvement. It got a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of your work now, and I really do hope that we get to see that evolution, because I can tell you're kind of restless and you'll keep growing.
Oh yeah,
so.
there's no way I'm stopping, and I'm gonna try and keep learning things as well. I mean, the students won't stop wanting to know. So yeah, I hope that growth can continue for as long as I'm around. Channels like this help a lot with that, to be fair. Like I learned a lot just listening to the 3 or 4 interviews that I caught up on over the past week. As I think I can't remember which of your guests was saying it, but I think it was maybe someone that Sean was talking to about comic book restoration. And he was saying that, one of the great losses from the comic studio days would be where you had, a room full of creators all trying to take on the same task. And you just learn so much just by being in that environment and looking around you and seeing people take on the same challenges and find different solutions for it. So forums like this, where you have creators talk about their work, talk about their process and their challenges, it can be so helpful to other creators, because we're all facing the same sort of stuff. And people have overcome a lot of the things that drive us crazy.
Well, I mean, that's definitely one of the big kind of driving things. Plus, it's just like we get to talk to awesome people like you and Ado and Gareth, and it's cool to talk, because we need that too, right? Like we want to grow and we're not getting that stuff. But that is I think, that's why we really appreciate you being on here, and every artist that comes on is like one more contribution to that kind of community, the virtual studio, I guess maybe is the way to put it.
It's a real thing.
So it's been really fulfilling, and it's been awesome to talk to you, and I really appreciate you contributing to that virtual studio that hopefully continues to grow. And I can't wait to see whatever you've got coming out next. And we'll definitely have to do you'll have to send us the title again of that book, and we'll see if we can source it and get back with you and talk about your favorite book back there.
Oh yeah, Isaac the Pirate by Christophe Blain. Yeah,
okay,
that's
I'll write
a great
that
one.
down.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite. My favorite is probably Nausicaa, that was already mentioned, but it's right up there.
Oh well,
yeah,
maybe
if you haven't come across
Nausicaa.
his work before, great stuff.
Well, maybe we'll talk about Nausicaa, because I have not read that, and I need to be chastised for that.
Hey,
to read it.
I haven't read it until relatively recently, but it is worth it, especially if you like. I mean, the story, it does suffer a little bit from that same thing of Isaac the Pirate, where you get the feeling that he was taking on a lot and hadn't necessarily known exactly how much he was taking on at part 1. But yeah, I mean, the drawing and the moment-to-moment storytelling it's pure Miyazaki. It's like, and he's one of the all-time greats. So
yeah, well, either way, I hope we get to talk again. I hope we get to talk about one of those two projects, or both of them, hopefully.
Yeah, I'd love to come back on. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and to Sean as well.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, Alexis. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
One of the best ways that you can support what we're doing here on the channel is to support the books that Sean's putting out through Living the Line. The first book that he put out is The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. It's a collaboration between Dave Sim and myself. The book was recently nominated for an Eisner Award in the Best Reality-Based category. It's a deep, deep dive into the artwork and methods of Alex Raymond and the mystery surrounding his death in a car crash. So if you haven't grabbed that already, please do. The Abolition of Man is a 5-issue mini-series done by myself and Sean in collaboration with the Midjourney AI. What you're seeing here is the cover to issue 1 and the first couple pages of issue 1. This first issue, we fed it an essay by C.S. Lewis, and this is just the imagery that the computer spat back at us. Issues 2 and 3 are a narrative, starting with the story that I wrote when I was 21, and then Sean's going to write issue 3, picking up where I left off. In this one, I'm kind of trying to force the AI to give me the images I want, and then doing some tweaking in Photoshop to get these kind of colored looks on it. For issue 4, we're turning the task of writing over to the AI as well. So the AI has written the script, and then we've just put that into the Midjourney AI, and it's turned out art. The script and the art is some of the absolutely most horrific stuff I've ever seen. We're a bit scared to even publish this issue. And I don't have any art to show for it yet, but Sean and I have decided to do a 5th issue of Abolition as well, because we have someone who we're really, really excited to have on board, providing an essay for that 5th issue that we'll illustrate, and we'll announce more about that soon. There's also Yokoyama Yuichi's Plaza, which is a totally intense manga by an artist who has somehow figured out how to distill manga down to its purest essence. This book was successfully funded on Kickstarter, but if you missed the Kickstarter, you can order it through any comic store, any bookstore, Amazon, any place that you would normally get your graphic novels from. Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.